This season turn it up to 10. Sorta like a bad habit, we gon' do it again. Ready or not, we're gonna tie up some men. Go tell the 36, try to grab all the friends. We're back like we never left. On track like a treble clef. Skip a beat on the 7th rest. Bring feast, we don't pass them over. We got the first fruits, no way to show us. This yoke is easy, this burns light. Even with a loud mouth trying to eat at the mic. Even if we down south, the humidity spike. Veils torn in two, so we gon' be alright. Don't stop, they're in need of it though. Through grace by faith, they could easily grow. New wave, new age, new way to see bro. Now one truth, life, one way to his throne. Can't live on that bread alone. Every word of God's mouth will fuel me on. That's scripture, that's Christ alone. That's grace alone, that's faith alone. All glory to God, cause that's his alone. Since the lamb's been slain, we can each belong. The Lord is my strength, my peace, and my song. Yet I'll lay it all down at the feet of his throne. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I'm just saying there's a time in the season, you gotta be a Berean. If you just hear and believe it, you could be walking with demons. It could be rendering Caesar. All the things that go to God, that's a little like treason. Wait, welcome back my friends. Did you ever really think we could pass the 10? Our socks up, we about to trend. Cause the whole 36 wanna rap again. Wait, sounds too good to be true. Like rabbinic candy land, ain't no ladders, just shoot. We hold true if it's loaded in the cannon. Best believe it's understanding, if it's not it ain't proof. Like sacred name of the 2 house frame. He gets something tickle, then you fill it in the blanks. It's hide and seek, let's see if you can find out all the little messages he hit before the timeout. Ever seen a scholar with a blue belt? I have, he's about to make your food melt. The loud one and he strikes again, but don't let him close range, he gon' bite your friends. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I bet you feel weak and your life is in tatters. With Bruce Street, your body is battered. You can't reach, trying to climb up that ladder. Sit back and hold fast till Messiah matters.
Welcome to Messiah Matters, show 530. I'm your host. My name is Caleb Haig. A little secret show today. I said last week that we weren't going to have a show. And then this morning I woke up and I was like, I got some stuff to talk about. Let's do it. So it's the secret show. I don't expect anyone in the chat room, but if you're in the chat room, welcome. It's going to be an interesting and fun day. I do have one, maybe two things to talk about, so it could be a short show, it could be a long show, who knows? It's the secret show. You found it. For those who are watching the recording, which I suspect will be the majority of people, you're going to want to catch this one. This one's going to be good. We're going to look at, I've had a lot of people send me stuff on this, and people are interested on this topic. Oh, look at that. Holla! We got people in the chat room. All right. So at least we got one, maybe two in the chat room. Good. All right. I leave on Thursday, Friday morning, very, very early, like 2 a.m. in the morning to get to Ohio. What is it? Let's see here. Thursday is Yom Kippur. So it's going to be an interesting week. A happy Yom Kippur to those who are believers, and may your reflection on the Day of Atonement be great and bring you closer to Yeshua, the Messiah. And then after that, I will be in Ohio, and you can come check out that conference if you want to. I'm going to record my sessions at least. I'm going to be with my good friend David Wilbur, who will be there. I bring his name up because I'm going to be talking about him here in a few seconds as well. And it's going to be good. I'm going to be speaking on the throne room of God. And then I'm coming back and I'm going to a different conference over in Moses Lake. And I love those people over there. I can't wait to see all those people as well. And so, yeah, it's going to be really good. I'm spending the Shemoneh Atzeret, the 8th day, with my family on a little vacation. But, happy festival season. We're in the thick of it right now. Okay, looks like I got 4 people, believe it or not, in the chat room right now. And, all right, let's get into it. Okay, why did I want to have a secret show today? Well, let's go to this email. We're just going to jump right in. We're going to jump right into the main topic, and it is the term pronomian. Now, there is a lot of history here, and I want to encourage people who are going to say, "Oh, it's Caleb just talking about identity and labels again." Yes, this might be true. However, I have settled. I'm good. I think the Lord has brought me to a very comfortable place in the past, I don't know, year or so. And we're going to talk about that. But Cole writes in and he says this. He says, I just came across this essay that was linked in one of Dr. Benjamin Zumsky's Substacks. I find the author to present some very compelling points and challenges the term pronomian, excuse me, as a label for those who would identify as holding to a one-law perspective. Let's pause real quick for those who have no clue what these words mean. First of all, Torah Resource, the company that actually, we should probably do that first, right? I mean, I'm kind of all over the place today. That's okay, though. So Torah, first of all, this is how you get a hold of me. See how you get TorahResource.com. This is how you get a hold of me on the comment line, 253-465-3205. And Torah Resource is the place that we're talking about right now. This is the producer of Messiah Matters. And Torah Resource was founded in 2002 by my father, Tim Hegg. Torah Resource is a Messianic Jewish organization. Around this time, my father was the theological editor for a ministry called FFOZ, First Fruits of Zion, and they started using the term one law. One law is a biblical term that can be found within the Torah and is used when it says, there shall be one law for you and for the stranger who is among you, okay? And so this became the term for people who believed that there was only one law for all of God's people and that it endured today. One law theology is what we call it. This is the term that I have definitely held on to now and the one that I go back to today. In the chat room, hey, it's not Wednesday. Yes, exactly. Okay, so fast forward, there's a new term floating around, and actually when I say fast forward, it's actually rewind to the early 80s. We'll talk about this in a few minutes. We get to this term pronomian, but it really starts to pick up steam and be used in the 2020s, okay? And we'll talk about kind of how this came about and whatnot. And the article in question here is by a gentleman named R.M. Bailey. And I've never met Bailey. I've never interacted with Bailey. Full disclosure, I haven't actually, this is probably shame on me for this, I haven't actually interacted or even read any of Bailey's work, and I understand that that's probably a big misstep on my part. But Bailey has a Substack, and R.M. Bailey wrote this article. It's called Pronomian, Messianic, Christian, Torahist. Actually, it's a question mark, Torahist. What then shall we call ourselves? Some thoughts towards labeling Torah-affirming believers and ideas. Of course, this has to be right down my alley because one of the things that I have struggled with so greatly throughout the years is identity and labels. Oh, I'm going to take this down now. Okay? And so I'm sure everyone's saying, oh, okay, well, here we go again. So let's go back to this question because it'll kind of lead us. I'm not going to obviously sit here and read all of this article by R.M. Bailey. I've linked it already in the description of this show. I would greatly encourage you to go and take a read. This is a great article. R.M. Bailey did clearly he's a gifted writer. Clearly he is a very thoughtful person who is able to put his thoughts together well and then put them on paper. It's an exceptional article. 100% everyone should read this article who's in the Torah movement, I think. And I think he gives some great push on certain elements of not only the term pronomian, but also the movement, if you will, within the wider Torah movement. And I think he does a very, very good job. In fact, it's made me want to probably read more of his stuff. I digress. Let's move on. He says, this, by the way, is not Bailey. This is from our friend Cole. Cole says, I know you have not advocated the term pronomian to be a comprehensive label for one law believers, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts on what the author is proposing in regard to the label messianic as a comprehensive label. Furthermore, how would you respond to the idea that pronomianism is beginning to be associated with Reformed theology that affirms Torah observance, and how do you think those holding to a Reformed perspective within one law theology should respond to this claim and define ourselves in light of the label messianic as used by the author? So let's pause for just a second again. You do kind of need to go read R.M. Bailey's post on this to understand exactly what's being asked here. But I will go to Bailey's writings here. This is the fourth paragraph down on the Substack article, and this is what R.M. Bailey says. He says, one such term is pronomian. He's talking about the differences within the Messianic movement. One such term is pronomian, which is a newer term being championed mostly by a select few people such as David Wilber, Caleb Haig, and Joshua Ensley. The term is by no means new, however, and has grown in its use both in association and not in association with Wilber, Haig, Ensley, and others. I myself have used the term since 2014. That's surprising because I had not heard this term until the early 2020s. So Bailey has been using this term long before I have, simply as an antithesis to antinomian. And this is, I believe, how the term was actually originally used. David Wilber has going on with R.M. Bailey here, David Wilber has probably popularized the term the most, not only given his wide reach via his platform, but through Pronomian publishing and his frequent use of the term. I tend to agree with this. I think that David Wilber has really been able to capture take hold, if you will, of this term, pronomian. Wilber, to my knowledge, provides no definition of the term apart from saying that it signifies a pro-Torah perspective as an antithesis to antinomianism. I might have some inside scoops on the fact that Wilber is probably working a little bit on his own definition of this term. Continuing with R.M. Bailey. Wilber seems to continue to describe himself as a messianic at times, and one will find him frequently using messianic Jewish as a term. Haig and Ensley differ but provide definitions. On his website, pronomian.com, Haig writes the following. Let's just pause for just a second. Pronomian.com is my website, and pronomian.com was kind of a way, so there is a lot of backstory to this, but Growing in Messiah was the website that my wife and I put together, and we put it out. We were putting out different posts and whatnot. We decided, hey, this is more like family and homeschooling oriented. I want to be able to just write, so I first started a blog post, and then I said, well, I need something a little bit more concrete. I was starting to design websites, and so I made this kind of a project. Pronomian.com is the project that came from that. And so it's essentially gone by the wayside now. I do not post on pronomian.com anymore. I haven't for a while. In fact, I'm actually deleting content as I take some of my articles and put them over on TorahResource.com and the blog posts over in the TR Learning Center. TorahResource.com is taken over, has all of my time, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy that I have been able to go into that role and be able to continue the work that my father started in 2002. Now, I've worked for my dad at Torah Resource since 2006. That also is a story, and just trying to navigate, where I was and what I was doing. Anyway, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. as we go on. But R.M. Bailey then takes my my definition of pronomianism, and this is what I say. This is a quote from my website. Pronomian, meaning pro-law in Greek, is a theological position that affirms the validity of God's law to some degree within the life of a Christian. Stop. This is very important. This is actually, this is all the definition we actually need. So to some degree within the life of a Christian is actually very important for my understanding of this belief, of this term, I should say. In some degree. This was, I specifically use these words because of my approach to the term pronomian. Going on, I say some have attempted to make pronomianism in a movement within Christianity, while others have seen it as a theological position. Both views have the strength, and even those who disagree on pronomian have their strengths. I think it should be. Who disagree on pronomian should be I'm sorry. Let's start that sentence again. Both views have their strengths, and even those who disagree on if pronomian should be a theology or a movement, are united, for the most part, in their views of Christ and their position on the law. And my quote, which I butchered, sorry, and my quote, and we're going to go on with just a little bit of R.M. Bailey here. He says, Haig continues to appeal to Dr. Zumsky, Benjamin Zumsky's fair description of the term, as well as Dr. G. Scott McKenzie's, and notes that they vary, that the very term itself initially appeared in Greg Bahnsen's book by this standard in similar fashion as an antithesis. Okay, let's pause. So, I'm not sure if I would say that I appeal. So on the website, Pronomian, I have my definition, and then under my definition, I have definition in academic writing. And at the time that I put this on here, the only two real definitions that there were in academic writing were from Zumsky and from McKenzie. It should be noted that Zumsky, in his PhD dissertation, gives 13 different principles of pronomian theology. Now, I am very good friends with Dr. Zumsky. He is a wonderful man. We agree on a ton of stuff. However, the idea that there should be principles added to the term pronomian, I was actually not for this. In fact, here's where it gets a little fuzzy. Now, I actually agree with R.M. Bailey on his general assessment of the term pronomian. With that said, I had always believed that the term should be retained in its original form. And what I mean by this is that, okay, let's go down memory lane, right? Let's talk about some history. I had grown up in a Messianic Jewish synagogue, which I think is probably more like Messianic or more like Orthodox than probably most Messianic places today. Okay, it was in terms of the way it looked, it was modeled very much after the Jewish synagogue. If a Jewish person walked in who had never been to a Messianic synagogue but had grown up in an Orthodox synagogue or something like that, I think that they would feel a lot more at home at the place that I grew up as opposed to somewhere else. Back in about 2017 or so, my wife and I started feeling like the Lord wanted us to have a different outreach. What we were noticing was that there were people who were coming from the mainstream Christian church. They were coming to an understanding that the Sabbath should still be kept by believers, and this was kind of like the first step, right? I think most people who are in the Torah movement realize that the Sabbath is usually the first. It's the first taste that people get of Torah observance, and then all of a sudden it's like that's how they enter into like Messianic Judaism or whatever it may be. The problem that we were seeing was that people were coming from the mainstream Christian church. They were coming into the synagogue that I was a part of, and it was like a culture shock extraordinaire, right? They were coming into the Messianic synagogue, and they had never seen any of the symbolism. They weren't used to liturgical prayer. Nothing was the same. It was just complete culture shock. And because of this, they were like, whoa, I'm out. This is too much for me. And they would leave and they'd go back to the church. And okay, my wife and I were saying, there's something here. We need to, there needs to be like a stepping stone. And so we started to discuss and talk with the leadership at the synagogue at the time. There were 4 leaders. My father was one of them. And we said, hey, what do you think of us going and starting a Saturday church that looks like a Baptist or a Presbyterian church? And, we feel like the Lord might be wanting us to do this. The leadership eventually said, yes, we think this is of the Lord. You should go do this. So we were sent out by that congregation to create a church. And we did. We started a home group, and it became a very small but I would say fun and vibrant church. It was modeled very much after the Baptist church. We sang hymns. We didn't do any liturgical prayer. We worshiped on Saturday. We celebrated the feasts. We had lunch afterwards. Everything, was a biblically kosher meal, so on and so forth. But it was very much like a Baptist church. And we kind of explored Torah observance within that setting and what that might look like. It was during this time that my good friend, Jeff Young, who is also Torah observant but attends church at a Presbyterian church, we were talking and he used the term pronomian. And I was like, whoa, wait, what did you just say? And so we started talking about this. He said, yeah, this term was actually, I think it was first used by Greg Bahnsen. Greg Bahnsen was a Presbyterian scholar, and he wrote a lot of books, and one of his books was By This Standard. And by this standard, I lost my, see what happens when I don't type enough? Hang on just a second. I have By This Standard pulled up somewhere if my, oh, there we go. Okay. So, by this standard, in the introduction, this is what Bahnsen says. He says, throughout the history of the Christian church, believers have asked what their attitude should be toward the commandments of God that are revealed in the Old Testament. A large variety of positions have been taken regarding God's law, stretching all the way from saying that there have been no changes in how the law should be observed, so that, for instance, animal sacrifices would be continued, to say that everything has been changed because of the change of dispensation, so that the Christian ethic is totally restricted to the New Testament. Between the two extreme poles, numerous other positions or attitudes, some pronomian, some antinomian, can be found, with subtle variations distinguishing one school of thought from another. In many cases, against the backdrop of this welter of opinions, it would be well to specify and summarize the position regarding God's law, which is taken in these chapters. So Bahnsen uses this term, okay, and I've talked about this before. Bahnsen uses this term simply to refer to anyone who is in any way pro-law. Now, okay, back to me in the work that I felt the Lord was leading me to do, which was to try to reach people in the Christian church. To me, Bahnsen had used the term that was not messianic. It wasn't Messianic Judaism over here, referring more to like maybe a practice, right? And you see this in the writings and the videos that I was doing at the time, right? Messianic Judaism was more of a Jewish rabbinical kind of idea of practice, whereas pronomian, in my view at the time, was more of a Christian view with, and maybe not view, but a Christian term that was being used to be favorable towards the law. When I first started using this term, it was my contention that any amount of pro-law would be considered pronomian. And so Jews who were unbelieving would be pronomian because they were pro-law. If you had a person who was a Messianic Jew, they would be pronomian because they're pro-law. If you had someone who was a Christian, and this actually is where the rubber really met the road for me. If you had somebody who was a Christian and they were favorable towards the law, maybe they believed that the law still continued to have validity. In my opinion, that was pronomian. Even if they said that the kosher laws, the festivals, the Sabbath was all done away with, they still, if they said, hey, there's a lot of validity to the law. And I'll give you a perfect example, R.C. Sproul. R.C. Sproul wrote an entire article on how Christians should love the law because God says to love the law. And therefore, it was my belief that R.C. Sproul was, in fact, pronomian. Or that, for instance, Bahnsen, the one from whom I now was like looking at this title, Bahnsen believed that the ceremonial aspects of the law had been done away with, but that the moral and the civil aspects still remained. And therefore, in my opinion, Bahnsen was Pronomian. Okay, and now there's some differences here, okay, because other people like Joshua Inslee. Now, let's pull back. Joshua Inslee is a friend of mine. Joshua Inslee and I, we see eye to eye on a lot of things. And over the past couple of years, both Inslee and I have had changes in our positions, right? For instance, my position on theonomy has changed. I used to push against theonomy, but I have now come over to the side of, yeah, I believe in theonomy, which is aligned more with Joshua Inslee's view. Joshua Inslee used to be, he used to push against certain things like he was egalitarian, but he has actually moved away from that and is no longer egalitarian. Therefore, we've come very close in our theological positions. But Inslee thought that the term pronomian, and Bailey talks about this in his Substack, the term pronomian should be a movement, pronomian Christianity. And to me, what that would do, with the idea of making it into a movement, making pronomian into a movement, was going to put things on it just like Zumsky did. He wrote 13 principles of pronomianism. I disagree with I disagreed with this. I thought, no, this should not be. As soon as you start to put labels on it, it becomes something that it was not originally, and the term loses its original meaning. And I didn't think that this was good, and this is why I started TorahResource.com. Or TorahResource.com, Pronomian.com. And we'll see in just a second, Bailey pushes against this because Inslee started Pronomian.org, and Pronomian.org takes a different view. This is more of the view of, hey, we should have these different principles and whatnot. And once again, this is not necessarily wrong. Okay, this is. We'll keep going, and I'll show you what I mean by this is not necessarily wrong. So let's go back to Cole, because Cole actually brings out the ideas a little bit more on this. He says to me, Cole says, do you think it's correct that the Torah movement should be seeking to reform within the larger Messianic body and allow the growth to come from there rather than Christendom at large as posited by the author? Let's just talk about this for a second. Yeah, absolutely. I think that within so Bailey in the end of his article suggests that we should just be using the term Messianic, and that this is the term where we should find build our different theological positions. I actually totally agree with this. In fact, as my family, let me give just a little bit more history. After the church that my wife and I helped start, and after it grew for a while, one thing led to another. Some people had to move away. Other people decided that they needed to do other things. There was no ill feelings at all. There was no fights or anything like that. But we felt like the Lord was telling us this has run its course. And after about 5 years, the church kind of disbanded. And my family, after kind of floating around for a little bit, we went directly into a Presbyterian church. And the Presbyterian church, we felt, was a way for us to actually start to push Torah observance within the church. And there were people within that church that God bless them. They were amazing believers, and there were some of them who were wrestling with the idea of like keeping the Sabbath and whatnot. And it was really at this point that I started to use the term pronomian like a lot, because it was actually a term that was used by Bahnsen, a Presbyterian, and it was a term that was that they could understand. And when I was talking to people, they were like, well, I don't believe that we should be keeping a kosher diet or that we should be keeping the festivals. But I'm certainly pronomian. I'm certainly pro-law. And so it was like we were meeting, it was like this meeting ground, right? Like we could find common ground in this term pronomian. And this is one of the reasons that I was very against the idea of making it into a movement or putting, principles onto it or any of these things. Now on pronomian.com, under, what is pronomian, I list these things. I list Zumsky's 13 principles and whatnot, because I wanted to show people that it was being used within academia and that it was being used beyond just this website, essentially. Okay. And so this is kind of how I was using the term. Okay, so back to actually, I'm sorry, I know I'm all over the place here. Let's go back to Bailey's article. It is a long article, but he says this. He says, second to the last paragraph, what I think this essay can shed light on is what we cannot, as Torah-affirming believers, allow a select group to be able to begin adding definitions and attributes to a term that is already widely used to describe what I am proposing. He's talking about the term messianic. In other words, can we bring more terms like pronomian onto messianic? He says it is essentially imposing upon a Torah-affirming worldview the same ornaments of dogma that Christendom did to eradicate the law from its doctrine in the first place. Yeah, so I tend to agree with this. However, I would say that I was not trying to use this term pronomian within the wider messianic world. I was trying to use it in its original sense within Christianity. In other words, like a stepping stone, if you will, from Christian to pronomian, and from pronomian as just not a belief structure or anything like that, but just a theological term of how we view the law. I'll go on with Bailey. Pronomian ought to be a neutral term for the general view of how we interpret the scripture. And the term for self-description as a Torah-affirming believer in Christ ought to be all-encompassing with a focus on Christ, i.e. messianic, while again neatly and gently distinguishing ourselves from Christians and Christianity. I also believe that the culturally motivated and likely being agreeable, inspired, unbiblical positions held by many Messianic Jewish groups towards Gentiles ought not to motivate us to remove ourselves from associating with them. This is a dynamite point. What he's saying is just because Messianic Jews say, like UMJC, MJAA, IAMCS, just because they say FFOC, just because they say the Gentiles are not part of this, doesn't mean that we should try to disassociate with these people. Rather, we should try to sway within the movement. And this is something that my father has always said, and I agree. Okay, rather be entreated as necessary in group conflict that must be addressed from within, not from without. Agreed. I totally agree with that. Those of us who envisage the Gentile believer as an equal and full member of God's people with the same expectations of righteousness placed upon them as those of Jewish descent ought to become, by God's actions, the predominant voice in the matter. I totally agree. We need to be concerned with why they are wrong with elevating antiquated and anachronistic rabbinic traditions and erroneously relegating the Gentile as a second-rate child of God, and that is more pressing than labels. I mean, this is a spot-on view, and I don't think I have never said it better myself. He is right on this. So I agree that the term messianic is probably the best label that we have within the movement. However, I will say this. The one thing I will say is that a lot of people, when the term pronomian is used, a lot of people will say, I don't think I've ever felt like a Messianic Jew because we haven't done a lot of the rabbinic stuff, right? And so I think that as the term pronomian progressed, what I was seeing was this idea of we are more in the church than we are in the in the Jewish synagogue, but we're Torah observant. And so this was somewhat of the distinction that I was starting to see within the term pronomian. Now, we can talk a little bit more about this, but let's go back to our question because Cole says this, furthermore, how would we respond to the idea that pronomianism is beginning to be associated with Reformed theology that affirms Torah observance? This is an interesting point. Let's finish his sentence. And how do you think those holding to a Reformed perspective within one law theology should respond to this claim and define ourselves in light of the label messianic as used by the author? These are two very big questions, and they're two different questions. So number one, we would first need to define Reformed theology. Are we talking about a difference between like Calvinism versus Arminianism? In other words, the doctrines of grace? So full disclosure here, I believe in the doctrines of grace. I would consider myself Reformed. Dr. Zumsky believes in the doctrines of grace. He would consider himself Reformed. Joshua Inslee believes in the doctrines of grace. He would consider himself Reformed. However, and I say this with complete love and no animosity at all, but David Wilbur, my dear friend, and truly a dear friend. I was talking with David Wilbur this morning via text. I really love his friendship and appreciate him as a believer and as a minister of the gospel. And there's not enough I could say. But David Wilbur disagrees with me on, I would say, two large issues. One of them is the doctrines of grace. He would not consider himself a Calvinist. And he also holds to egalitarianism. These are the two, and we prod each other about this. We kind of, we prod each other about this when we're together. So it's not, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with having different views on this. But once again, going back to Bailey has suggested that David Wilbur is the one who's further pushed the term pronomian the most. But I don't know if Wilbur would consider himself Reformed. I don't think he would. And so right there's a little bit of a discontinuity there. In fact, I would say that Wilbur is the one who has now essentially taken this term and is championing it because he has Pronomian Publishing, right? So he's really in the driver's seat of this term at this point. Joshua Inslee, Baruch Hashem, praise the Lord, he's had a child, and he's working diligently in to build the church that he's pastoring, okay? I've essentially, since the last time that Torah Resource used the term pronomian, which was the 2024 Torah Resource Pronomian Conference, since that time we have not used pronomian really in our literature or anything else. In fact, we've kind of dropped the term pronomian from our material, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. In fact, you'll notice that this year's conference is now the Torah Resource Academic Conference, and the reason why, I'll just talk about it now. The reason why is because I think that the term has, in fact, kind of taken a life that is a little bit different than how I was initially using it, which is totally fine. I have no problem with that. And I think people like David Wilbur are able to take that term now, and they're able to kind of shape it however they want. However, I actually agree with Bailey. And I think that Wilbur would too, right? Wilbur considers himself Messianic, but Bailey says we should use this term Messianic. In all truth, and I'll lay my cards out here, after my family went and did what we felt the Lord was leading us to do in terms of starting a church, that ended. We went into a Presbyterian church. We left that church after a year with no animosity towards anyone. We went to a different church. We have been at a non-denominational Christian church for the past year and a half, and now we feel like the Lord is taking us back to kind of our roots. We're going back more towards a Messianic Jewish. We think that the Lord might be having us start another Messianic Jewish congregation and moving back towards those kind of the roots that I had. And I think that part of that is because of my kids. As my kids grow up, I've realized I want them to know the things that I've known. I want them to know the traditional prayers because I grew up saying them. I want my son to have a bar mitzvah. I had a bar mitzvah. I want my son to have a bar mitzvah. These are the kind of things that as we continue to move on in our lives, and as the Lord has brought us through certain times, it's like your ministry was here is what we felt like the Lord was saying to us. But now that that's over, it's like, okay, now what? It's like, well, there's other things that are going on too around us that make us think, it might be time for us to actually push the roots of where we came from, which is a Messianic Jewish belief. So this is why the term pronomian for me personally has kind of, now, would I say I'm pronomian? Sure, absolutely. I have no problem with that. But ultimately, I've gone back to what my roots are, which is, I'm Messianic, I'm one law. And if people want to say, well, you're not Jewish or whatever, okay, I have no problem with that. So I'll call myself Messianic, I'll call myself one law. These are the things that I think Torah Resource has been very firm on since my dad founded this ministry in 2002. Okay, so, but what would my response be to the idea that is becoming reformed? Well, I think that David Wilbur is the stopgap there. I don't think that you can say that the term pronomian is becoming a reformed term, because I think that Wilbur is the one who is really driving the ship on this now. Ruski Bear in the chat room says, that makes sense. I agree that the term pronomian can vary depending on who you talk to or listen to. Okay, I agree. So the second part of this question was, and how do you think those holding to a reformed perspective within one law theology should respond to this claim and define ourselves in light of the label messianic as used by the author? This is where I think ultimately okay. I think that we should, once again, Bailey's completely right that we should be trying to be the dominant voice within the Messianic movement, right? That the Gentiles are included, that one law theology is the right theology to have. However, within Judaism, we don't see there's clearly differences, right? Reformed, Orthodox, conservative, conservadox, ultra-Orthodox, right? But these really have to do with practice. Right? Theologically speaking, people can have different theological views within Judaism, and it doesn't matter. And this is a little bit how I see the Messianic movement as well. I can be Reformed and somebody else can be Arminian, hold to Arminian theology. It doesn't make a bit of difference. In fact, we can disagree even within our communities, right? And this is the old adage. This is the old joke, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 4 synagogues. The idea is that we're always going to have different views. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. So I don't even know if it's necessary to try to define different. I think it's almost a Christian idea to have like denominations, right? Once again, going back to like the 4 people that we've talked about the most, myself, David Wilbur, Inslee, and Zumsky, we all might have some varying opinions, but what are the core staples of what I would consider to be messianic? I would consider them to be that we believe Yeshua is the Mashiach, right? Ultimately, as a whole, the Messianic movement believes in the deity of Yeshua. So deity, we believe in a 66-book canon as a whole. I would say that the majority, if not the overwhelming majority of Messianics don't believe that there should be any more canonical books than the 66 books. In fact, I would say that FFOZ is somewhat the outlier who attempts to say that the rabbinic writings have some divine authority in some way. I would say that Messianics as a whole say, no, that shouldn't be. And so we have these, my point here is that within Messianic Judaism, or within Messianic, however you want to say it, there are already these foundational doctrines that everybody agrees on. And if you go to the UMJC or you go to the MJAA, they're going to have these in their statements of faith. Even Torah Resource, we have these in our statement of faith. So if you look at the statement of faith from the UMJC, the MJAA, even the IAMCS and Torah Resource, you're going to see essentially continuity all the way through. The only difference is going to be the place of the Torah for the Gentiles. Outside of that, we're pretty agreeable. Now, within that, there's going to be people who are dispensationalists. Within that, there's going to be people who are, I don't know, they're all different views, right? Calvinists and Arminian and all sorts of different things. I don't think that there necessarily needs to be denominations. These are hashed out within the congregations. And we can find unity, like my good friends and I have all found unity. I could go today to a conference. Zumsky, Wilbur, Inslee, and myself could all be there. We would have a blast. We would have a blast. We would be able to worship the Lord in unity. There would be, and there would be no problem there. There would be no problem. We would 100% feel united as brothers in the Lord. So I don't think that there needs to be we need to have this denomination or whatever. Okay. Do you think it's correct that the Torah movement should be seeking to reform within the larger Messianic body and allow the growth to come from there, rather than Christendom at large as posited by the author? Yeah, 100%. I think that I had a great conversation with a good friend the other day who said that his children wouldn't have come to belief in Torah observance if he hadn't 100% distanced himself from the church. And I've thought about that a lot. I think that allowing the modern day church to dictate our growth or our who we are, I don't know if that's going to work. I think that it needs to be that Torah observant believers dictate our growth and who we are now that we're big enough. Just as the Christian church did in the Reformed churches did or I should say the Protestant churches did within the Reformation. We should not allow people who are not Torah observant to dictate how the Torah movement grows. And I think that within Messianic Judaism or within the Messianic movement, we should be able to do the same. I think that the idea that the UMJC, MJAA, IAMCS, FFOZ, these people believe that the Gentiles should not keep Torah. The truth is that that's leadership. If you go to any of these congregations, there's tons of people within these congregations who are Gentiles and they're one law. And so I think that as one law, even within the most ardent Messianic congregations where they separate Jew and Gentile, you still have people who are one law. I know this for a fact because I know those people. I know them. I've talked to those people recently. There are people all throughout the world who are in these MJAA and UMJC congregations, and they are Gentiles or they're Jews, and they are one law, but they keep silent because they think that the majority are not, or that they're going to get kicked out for their views. And you know what? Unfortunately, they might be right because the guys who hold the keys, the leadership right now, are not one law. That's unfortunate. Some are. That's another point. Some are one law, but they feel like they have to stay silent for now. So he goes on. I'm going to get through this and one little part of the conclusion of Bailey's article, and I'll be done with this point. He says, I know you have shared your thoughts on one law becoming a denomination. Actually, I haven't. One law is a theology, but I think he means pronomian. Pronomian becoming a denomination. Honestly, at this point, that's not in my hands anymore. I think that this is really up to Wilbur. I think that Inslee has driven that ship, but ultimately I think that Wilbur's the one who is really in the driver's seat right now in terms of the term pronomian. I've stepped back from it. I'm happy with going back to my own roots and the terms that my father built Torah Resource on, which are Messianic and one law. And so those are the things that I will claim at this point. But I mean, obviously, I have no animosity towards anyone on this. If somebody wants to say, well, are you pronomian? I'm happy to say yes. But that's just not how I am. Now that that this portion of ministry for me, I feel like the Lord has brought me into, he's brought me through that portion of ministry. It served a wonderful and beautiful service to the people that it needed to serve. But that's not where my family is anymore. And so I think that we're starting a new chapter, and Baruch Hashem, praise the Lord for that. We're happy to go wherever the Lord will have us. And I think that is into the Messianic one law movement. And so this is probably another reason that I'm happy to say that Bailey I think he's spot on all this. He says, however, I would like to hear your thoughts based on what the author proposes about creating a Messianic denomination, which would perhaps allow for distinctives within Calvinism versus Arminian, etc. Or do you think that these issues are distinctive that would have to be maintained to distinguish Reformed one law believers from Messianic? I think that I've already gone over this. And that's okay. I think that I don't think that we need denominations. I think that each congregation is going to have to decide what they believe, right? Just like within Judaism. And we have someone in the chat room, not a fan of Wilbur. Well, I think that Wilbur's done amazing work for the Torah movement. And you know what? I'm sure there's a lot of people who are not a fan of me as well. Let's finish this up. I would love to know your thoughts and open this conversation to more like-minded believers, as I believe that what the author is ultimately proposing, at the very least, is a step in the right direction for the movement at large. I agree with that. Okay, let's go back to Bailey and finish this whole thing up. This is his final paragraph in the article that he's written. He says, a final note that I find to be the most important is that discussions like this one need to inspire Messianics and Pronomians to finally come together, unite, and under one banner start to develop some type of universal catechism or doctrinal statement, if that is at all possible. This has actually been tried by pretty much most people. Inslee has a statement that you can sign on his website. Hang on. I know that he's tried to create a catechism. I took the 1689 Baptist Confession, and I took the Westminster Confession, and I rewrote these in what I thought was like a Torah observant way, so that I could give them to people who were coming to the church that I was pastoring and say, here, this is what we believe. It's based off of something that you might know, the Westminster Shorter Catechism, whatnot. I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with this, but once again, I think you're going to find disagreements in terms of, and some of them are going to be big and some of them are going to be little. I think one of the only things that Inslee and I actually like openly disagree on right now is the place of like communion, and that's fine. Like, what a small thing to debate over, right? Like that's neither here nor there. So I'm sure that Inslee and I could find some great common ground when it comes to a statement of faith. Same with Wilbur. Wilbur and I agree on a lot. However, I think, I would think that egalitarianism is actually a large issue. To me, that is a large issue. Now, is that going to separate us in terms of, I'm literally teaching with Wilbur this coming weekend at a conference. So obviously it's not going to separate us that much. No, of course not. We're going to have a wonderful time, and I'm so excited to be with him. Okay. So, I don't know if we need a statement like that, but if people want to create it, that's fine. I personally don't think we need it. I think that we can stand on the foundational issues that we all agree on, that we can find on even like UMJC, MJAA, whatnot, and the statements of faith that we find on people's websites and whatnot. These all unite us with the foundational issues. If somebody's going to deny the deity, if somebody's going to try to add to the canon or something like that, of course this isn't going to work. Okay, so he goes on. For example, why is there a pronomian.com and a pronomian.org? In full disclosure here, this started because of a disagreement on whether or not pronomian should be a movement or whether it should be a theological term. That was the only difference. Now, we did have more theological differences at the time. However, the truth is that as time goes on, we'll see what happens, but I'll probably end up relinquishing pronomian.com to someone like Wilbur or whatnot, and because it's no longer serving the purpose that it did for me when I originally started it. With that said, that probably won't be for some time. I still like the idea of the Pronomian website, which was the idea of like Greek law and like, I don't know. Anyway, okay. If you look at the aesthetic, I'm just talking about aesthetic, not about like theology. Anyway, it was a pet project. I still love it a little bit. Okay. He goes on. I doubt there's any issue there. That's true. There is no issue between Inslee and I. So I am just being funny, but the irony of Messianics apparently having, quote, the full truth and being even more divided than Christendom is a contradiction of that which we claim to affirm. I agree. In fact, once again, I think that our movement's actually starting to find a lot more unity. But I would posit that the reason it's finding a lot more unity is because of the lunacy within the Hebrew Roots movement. Right. So we're finding unity because we're saying, look, who cares about communion, right? Or, your belief versus mine. Who cares about egalitarianism when we're talking about people who are denying the deity of Christ, or they're trying to interpret the scriptures through the Aleph Tav, or they're using the Et Sefer Bible or whatnot, right? Like these things, I think that the Messianic movement's like, no, I don't think so. And so we're finding unity there, right? And where we might have disagreed on certain things before, now we're starting to find a lot of unity. He goes on, I believe it is high tide, and we need to join, encourage, and empower one another and work towards establishing an official type of denomination where our greatest minds can join together and establish all of what we hold to be true while simultaneously dispelling and soundly debunking heresies and other things which have been fostered within the Hebrew Roots arena. This is a great point. Once again, I'm not necessarily against the idea of having some kind of a denomination, but I'm not sure if that's even really needed. right? Once again, even the people that I tend to disagree with a lot more, we are finding more and more unity, right? But ultimately, I think that there is starting to be a good amount of unity with what I would consider to be the second generation, right? My father being like that first generation, the second generation is now starting to find a lot more unity. The larger Messianic world, see, I'm just using the term, is begging for this, and I've even played around with something I've called the Orthodox Messianic Proclamation. I would love to see that. So if I don't know if R.M. Bailey ever even knows about this show, but if he does and he watches this, then I would be interested to see what that might look like. I myself am happy to fall under an umbrella that properly, soundly, exegetically, and objectively represents a single quasi-organization, and am more than willing to participate in open dialogue towards that end, as am I. I'm sure, absolutely. I'm 100% on board with that. It would be challenging, but I don't think we'll ever look like anything other than a bunch of Lone Rangers all positing ourselves as the correct voiceover against all the others. It will never work, and that's not how God works anyway. Yeah, I mean, as I study 1 Corinthians, and I'm doing my 1 Corinthians Bible study, the idea of unity is real big for Paul here, and the fractured Corinthian church is a big problem. So I tend to agree. I think that Bailey here, give me 1 second, makes some great points in that end. However, I am not as, I don't want to say critical. Maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic, I hope. My wife says I'm not optimistic at all on things. But I think on this, I actually am. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic that the unified front that we're seeing from this second generation is super encouraging. Once again, I think Wilbur is such a good example because David Wilbur is such a good friend of mine, and he's such a beloved brother to me. I'm happy to travel with him and to speak with him, and we talk often. He encourages me. I encourage him. Our differences in theology almost never come up. Every once in a while, he'll throw in. We were at a conference in, I think it was March or May or something like that. He made a little dig at me, right? And it was all in good fun. It was hilarious. And so, I mean, that was like the one time that our theological, and I threw it back at him, of course, but that was like the one time that I think our theological differences have come up, and it was just a passing comment. It was hilarious. It was a joke, right? So, I mean, I don't think that, and I don't know exactly what Bailey here believes in terms of whether or not he considers himself to be reformed, or whether or not he's egalitarian, or whether or not he thinks we should be taking communion, or, I mean, list any disagreement that is a peripheral disagreement, right? I mean, I'd say this even about people that I work with very closely. Ariel Berkowitz is not only a friend of mine, Ariel Berkowitz is a mentor of mine. I use his commentaries often, and not only that, but I talk to him a lot, and I would consider him to be one of my mentors. And we disagree on certain elements. Rob Van Hoff and I, another one of my teachers and the people that has not only been a co-host of this show for so long, but has really shaped who I am theologically. My father and I don't disagree on a lot, to be honest with you. He's always won the day. But there's always going to be little disagreements. That doesn't mean that we're not unified. We're not a unified front in what we're doing. However, with that said, I'd be happy, just like Bailey says here, I would be happy to sit down and try to have some kind of organization if that's what others think we need. I just don't know if that's necessarily necessary at this point in time. All right. I think that that's what I'm going to say about all of that. Now, you guys have not disappointed when I've asked for certain, for topics and whatnot. I'm going to be back in a week. So a week and a couple days. When should we celebrate festivals? This is one I wanted to do it today because I think it's really important. We're in the middle of the festivals, but I think it's going to have to wait until after the festivals. It's just something that I think we got to wait for. But we'll talk about it. Then you'll have that video to give to people next year, right? Should people be citing the moon themselves? We've talked about it before. Men of the Great Assembly. Man, I had a conversation with someone who was raised Jewish and just came to Yeshua. And there was a comment that I realized I think a lot of people don't understand my position on rabbinic writings and how we can use them within history, and how we can use them within our hermeneutics. Can we use the rabbinical writings within our hermeneutics? And I think that this is a really important issue, and especially when we're reading books like Jesus and the Law of Moses, right, by Paul Sloan. This book I think is kind of on the forefront right now. And a lot of people are reading it. A lot of people are gaining from it. We have essentially a Christian scholar who's advocating for Yeshua not doing away with the law, right? And I think that is really important. But he uses the rabbinic literature a lot to prove his points. So is this okay? Is this something that we should be okay with? How is he using it? All these kind of things. There's a lot of other topics, but these topics will be exhausted within 2 shows. So keep sending them in. Send in more of your questions, your comments, whatever. You can send them into chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. You can also call the comment line 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. Find all sorts of stuff on torahresource.com. The TR Learning Center has a blog. I try to post to it at least once a month, if not 2 to 3 times a month. And I got another one coming out very shortly. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I know it sounds weird, but it really does help us. Hey, my love and my, honestly, I extend friendship, love, warmth, blessings to all of the people that I've talked about today. I love you guys, whether it's Mackenzie, Zoomski, Wilbur, Inslee, Bailey, all y'all. I mean, I would love to get together at some point. We can all get together and have a cup of coffee or something and I don't know, be united in our love for the Mashiach and God. And if we need to do something like start a denomination, then let's do that. I'm happy to do whatever. I got nothing but love and blessings for those guys. And I hope that their work continues to be a blessing to everybody else. And I hope that this show also is a blessing to all y'all. All right. I hope that this conversation has done at least one thing. That is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? Well, you know why. Because Messiah matters.